We've already looked at some of the longer term causes of the Civil War, and what we'll begin looking at right now are some of those that were closer to when the Civil War actually began. And we'll start with Uncle Tom's Cabin. Uncle Tom's Cabin was a book written by Harriet Beecher Stowe. What made this book unique is that it is going to depict the more personal side of slavery. It's going to show just how very evil slavery was to the public. See, when we've talked about slavery before, we've really been talking about it on a political level, talking about how it would upset the balance between slave and free states, instead of really talking about the personal side and the evil side of slavery. See, many Americans, if they did not have anyone who owned slaves in their lives, then it really didn't impact them in a big way. So what this book did was really brought it to their attention. And two of those main characters were Uncle Tom and Simon Legree. And these two characters were very stereotypical. So even though this book does depict the evil part of slavery, it does it in a very stereotypical way. In 1852 alone, this book sold over 1 million copies. Now, if you can imagine just what a major number of books that is, it was the kind of book that people read and passed on to their friends and relatives just to give them an insight into this particular issue. Now, obviously, this book is not going to be popular in the South. In fact, this book is going to be banned in many places in the South. And the South completely hated this book because they believed that this was just an attack on their complete way of life, and they took it extremely personally. But what this book really served to do was to those people who were kind of sitting on the fence on the issue of slavery, it really served to kind of push them to see just how very evil this practice was. In 1854, popular sovereignty was going to be officially passed to determine how they were going to decide whether or not the Kansas and Nebraska territories would have slavery. And in the Kansas-Nebraska Act, that's exactly what they determined. So remember, what happens here is that the voters of those territories get to vote. So what happens is that you have those who were pro-slavery, quote, voters, and then those who were abolitionist, quote, voters, who are going to flood that region to fraudulently vote to determine whether or not slavery was going to be allowed. So really you had people from both sides, both pro-slavery and anti-slavery, who were flooding that area to actually vote in an election that they shouldn't have been allowed to vote in. So it was not a legitimate election. Kansas even gets the nickname Bleeding Kansas because all of this turns extremely violent. Violent pops up all over Kansas because of the issue of slavery and anti-slavery. In fact, in a lot of areas, you would have an anti-slavery government running, and then you would have a pro-slavery government running, both of them enacting contradictory legislation about the same area. So we're going to see all kinds of violence pop up. This even goes all the way to the U.S. Senate. This begins with the Southern Senator Preston Brooks and the Northern Senator Charles Sumner. Now, Charles Sumner was giving some type of speech where he is criticizing the South and makes some type of critical remark regarding someone Preston Brooks knew. Preston Brooks is going to approach Charles Sumner and he says, "You have dishonored the South, you have dishonored my family." And he then proceeded to beat Charles Sumner over the head with his cane until his cane broke. Now, obviously, this is going to physically hurt Charles Sumner very badly. He was in the hospital for some months with a tremendous amount of head injury here from this. And the North saw this as particularly very brutal, and it really characterized for them just how many Southerners were. The South, however, looked at it differently. In fact, you had a lot of Southerners who were sending Preston Brooks new canes that said, "Hit him again." So this is going to really kind of highlight just how serious this issue had become across the United States. It goes all the way to the U.S. Senate. The court case Dred Scott versus Sanford is another good example of where we see the issue of slavery making it all the way to the Supreme Court. Dred Scott was a slave, and during his lifetime he was taken into free states. Now, he was in a free state for a period of time, and then is eventually going to sue for his freedom, and it goes all the way to the Supreme Court. Now, what the Supreme Court ruled at this point in time, most of them were from the South. Most of those Supreme Court justices were Southern. So they ruled three things. One, they said that blacks were not citizens, that they were considered property. So because they were not citizens and because they were property, that they in fact didn't even have the right to sue in court. The court also ruled that it was illegal to ban slavery. So all of these laws that had been passed that banned slavery in certain territories, they ruled that those were unconstitutional, and then ruled that the Missouri Compromise itself was illegal. So what this does is it makes it illegal to ban slavery anywhere in the United States. So now slave owners were free to take their slaves into any territory that they wanted to in the United States. So this is going to be seen as a huge victory for the South. The Republican Party is going to develop mostly because of the issue of slavery, because slavery had become the main issue and really highlighted the differences between most parties. In fact, the differences really just came down to where they stood. So in 1850, this whole group of anti-slavery Whigs, anti-slavery Democrats, and then free soilers. Now, your free soilers are going to be exactly what it sounds like. They just wanted the new territories to have no slavery. So that's that free soilers. They're going to form one new party, and that's going to be the Republican Party. So that particular party is the one that's going to um, come to predominance in this period, and it becomes the Republicans and the Democrats are going to be your main two. But the official party policy of the Republicans was that they opposed the growth of slavery where it did not exist. So remember, they are not trying to get rid of slavery anywhere in the South where slaves already existed, but they did not want slavery to expand where it was not already there. So that is going to be a key difference. And you see Abraham Lincoln here. He is going to really cling to that official party policy as well. So that's going to be very important too. Again, they're not going to touch slavery where it already exists.